Namaste. Is poverty reduction even possible? I would really like to think so. But to understand what poverty really is, I'd like to first share its definition, which also suggests the need to use different strategies to address each level of deprivation effectively. So, when adopted, could improve the short and long-term economic conditions of the almost 700 million people estimated to be in extreme poverty in 2019. Also important is to embed legislative safeguards as the population grows to be over 8 billion people by July 2024. There are three levels of poverty, namely extreme poverty, which is the percent population earning below $2.15 per person per day. This already includes a large segment of the global population currently dependent on public largesse for their survival. Poverty measures are now understood to also include the availability and access to services considered essential for the improvement of human productivity and include, in addition to per capita income, essentials such as food, water, utilities, and housing. This definition is also better known and understood as a measure of multidimensional poverty. Yes, I do believe that poverty reduction is possible when duty bearers understand and commit themselves to earnestly delivering the human rights agenda. The global effort to include the poor in the market economy has led to profound achievements, including the reduction of extreme poverty over the last 25 years by more than 50%, tripling the number of people living on more than $4 a day and helping 2.6 billion people gain access to improved drinking water. Leave no one behind. UN's midterm assessment summary of SDGs 1 and 8, delivering on commitments, where do we stand halfway to 2030, shows the lack of progress towards the Sustainable Development Goals is universal. But it is abundantly clear that developing countries and the world's poorest and most vulnerable people are bearing the brunt of our collective failure. The compounding effects of climate, COVID-19, and economic injustices are leaving many developing countries with fewer options and even fewer resources to make the goals a reality. Let's first talk about the economy of the issues of poverty alleviation. The global population as of January 2024 was 8,088,223,743 people. That's just over 8 billion. To better understand the population's capacity to effectively manage their affairs, various organizations have grouped the global population into four groups by per capita income, which are low income, low middle income, upper middle income, and high income. The average global income per person is estimated to be approximately $12,235 per year. This figure represents the gross domestic product, or GDP per capita, which measures everyone's contribution to a country's economy. The low-income countries are easily defined by their GDP, which is the revenue from all sectors that contribute to the country's income. It is not hard to link low GDP with the low productivity of populations that have little or no resources to invest in enterprises that would allow their contribution to flow towards national income generation. The population that earns between 0 and 1,000 per month per capita falls within those in extreme poverty. The countries that are estimated to have over 50% of their populations in poverty are South Sudan, Madagascar, Central African Republic, Burundi, Congo, Guatemala, Eswatini, Haiti, Sierra Leone, Sao Tome and Principe, South Africa, Afghanistan, Somalia, Zambia, Gambia, Liberia, Malawi, and Lesotho. I can imagine the exercise to plan for the productive engagement of 50% and more of the country's population below the poverty line must be mind-boggling, strenuous, painstaking, and at most times an extreme exercise in futility if the country has low GDP and struggles to pay off the international debts obtained to keep afloat. The debt to GDP ratio varies, but in the poor countries identified is around 50% of the country's GDP, which forces government to make difficult investment choices with the meager funds available, which largely dictates investments be made to respond to the population's daily requirements instead of investing in modernizing agriculture, industry and manufacture, and health, education, and water and sanitation services. Finding themselves between the devil and the deep blue sea, governments, fully understanding the limitations facing them, seek alternatives to ensure investments made with the meager funds they do have offer a good chance of succeeding in achieving their agreed targets in a globally divisive environment that throws up risks much like the waves in the ocean that challenge a swimmer's every stroke. Poverty reduction as a capitalist ploy to capture global markets. Enter the carpetbaggers. Let's not confuse democracy with capitalism. Democracy involves citizens in decision-making through voting, elections, and participation, aiming for just, equal, and free societies. Capitalism is based on private ownership and emphasizes market-driven trade, profit, and competition. Democracy aims for social welfare and equality, while capitalism prioritizes individual interests and tends to create disparities. Democratic decision-making involves debate, while capitalism operates through profit-oriented trade decisions. Governments' attempts at absorbing capitalism within their democratic framework have been seen to disillusion the population's faith in democracy, which continues to remain strong across the globe, by falling short of delivering promises made while trying to balance democratic values, equity, and justice with economic growth, social welfare, and ethical considerations. Vulnerable countries, those having a high GDP debt ratio, fall into the group that requires financial, technical, and managerial resources to even partially address the promises made to their electorate. This need is obviously seen as an opportunity to service markets that see no option to external support and are offered the assistance required on conditions which take advantage of this opportunity to clone the country into a state dependent on the provider of support and its shareholders. Although the poor country accepts in good faith the terms and conditions offered, their continued dependency on and subjugation by the provider allows for their exploitation. The global market and self-interest. I literally stopped in my tracks when I realized what Biden meant by American self-interest in the Middle East. He wasn't talking about safeguarding the American troops left behind or ensuring regional stability, but about safeguarding the USA's access to Middle Eastern resources of oil, natural gas, and minerals, and the opportunity to destabilize any collaborations between countries in the region that consider or act contrary to American free market ambitions. The ambition of the capitalist West to provide themselves with a foothold in the Middle East region, to exert influence and ultimately influence their control on independent governments, is the reason for their supporting the protracted war against the Palestinians that forces Israel's neighbors to acknowledge the threat of the Israel-USA partnership to their sovereignty if access to their markets and trade conditions remain elusive. This neoconservatism that has anchored itself into American polity emphasizes aggressive foreign policy, cultural and religious matters, religion's role in society, free market capitalism, and the use of force overseas. Neoconservatism firmly advocates for an aggressive foreign policy characterized by American imperialism and a focus on cultural and religious matters. It places significant importance on religion, particularly Christianity, in society, and strongly supports free market capitalism. Additionally, neocons believe in the use of force overseas to achieve their objectives. The vulnerability of countries. Country management, although looks glamorous from the outside, is truly a thankless task, especially when, as a decision maker, one is faced with a constantly changing global scenario that is normally the basis for the decisions made. The best one can hope for is the decision made to be good enough till the time for its realignment with the revised situation. This dynamic but inconsistent series of changes that determines the quality of decisions made adds to the vulnerability of nations to effectively manage both their short-term objectives and long-term goals. This is particularly true for low-income countries, as shown in the table in the presentation. These countries have low governance ratings, low GDP, high debt, and a high percentage of the population living below the poverty line. It is doubtful that any government in power can make progressive decisions when most of the stakes are against them from the start. And everybody knows that the dice are loaded. Influencing vulnerable countries to favor their inclusion into the ambitious plans of market expansion with resources essential for their development is comfortably facilitated by multilateral global institutions like the IMF and other similar organizations whose agendas are based on favoring capitalism and are largely influenced by capitalist economies. Global institutions and hegemony. Multilateral institutions were established around 80 years ago to address the fundamental global challenges faced by nations after the Second World War and to promote cooperation among nations. These institutions have played a crucial role in promoting human rights, maintaining peace, fostering prosperity, and addressing common threats. Institutions such as the United Nations and its organizations, the World Trade Organizations, and the IMF World Bank have forged consensus on critical issues like global pandemics, human rights, nuclear non-proliferation, climate change, and much more, and have made significant improvements in improving the status of the world's population. As of the end of 2023, the world was in a state of chaos with wars, mass migration, an increase in the population living in extreme poverty, and higher levels of insecurity than at any point since World War II. The global situation is delicately balanced and could easily fall to either side, both of which would have fatal consequences. So how has our world reached this cliff edge despite having multilateral institutions managed and staffed with the best minds available to us? I guess we must understand and accept that the best minds are those who have undergone years of education in the best Western educational institutions and thus have volunteered to be indoctrinated into the capitalist agenda and its approaches as their path to a career and financial security which their own countries could not offer them. The multilateral organizations have been strategically managed by manipulating the decision-making process to promote the West's capitalistic ideology across the globe. As the US holds sufficient voting power to veto major decisions within the IMF, World Bank, UN Security Council, and other multilateral organizations, they, in addition to the members of the G7 and the European Union, have the voting majority, which is enough to subjugate vulnerable member countries. The misuse of the multilaterals by the Western Alliance blatantly aims to enforce their dominance over the more vulnerable countries by seeking to weaken member countries' military, political, and economic independence to benefit Western businesses. Recent examples of Western hegemony are Vietnam, Afghanistan, Libya, and Iraq, aggression against Syria and Yemen, support to the Israeli genocide of Palestinians, and many more unreported in other parts of the world. So why trust the existing multilateral organizations when their goals do not shake hands with your own, and who you know will exploit your weaknesses every step of the way and ultimately indebt the country and its people to a lifetime of subjugation? About multidimensional poverty. The Leaving No One Behind Human Development Index is a measure of inequality in countries' HDI and allows for a more complete analysis of human development since inequality assessment across countries is neglected when only absolute HDI levels are analyzed. Social protection aims to provide a secure platform upon which individuals can build productive and sustainable livelihoods, directly reduce poverty and vulnerability, as well as support excluded citizens in accessing other essential services. The objective of social protection vary widely from reducing poverty and vulnerability, building human capital, empowering women and girls, improving livelihoods, and responding to economic and other shocks. The process of identifying the extent to which interventions are required to provide social protection to vulnerable families is assessed by the multidimensional assessment method. The countries that have an MDP score of less than 0.5 indicate countries with the highest prevalence of multidimensional poverty. Countries rated at 0.5 need to invest in making available and accessible the essential services required by the population, which include employment, health, education, water and sanitation services, and more, to improve the productivity of its population. Regionally, the monetary headcount, which is based on the international poverty line of $2.15 per day, shows sub-Saharan Africa is ranked first with around 32% of the population below the poverty line, followed by South Asia, 8%, and Latin America and the Caribbean, 4%. The multidimensional poverty measure headcount indicates the share of the population in each region defined as multidimensionally poor and is topped by Sub-Saharan Africa, 52%, and South Asia, 17%. The MDP rating, when assessed for locations within regions, will provide a more accurate view of the level of multidimensional poverty and a better indication of the challenges to sustainable growth and increasing productivity. Of the 121 economies reviewed by the World Bank, 54 countries fall into the high multidimensional poverty rating. Another perspective that makes clear the disparity between the haves and have-nots is understanding the distribution of wealth, which directly indicates the ease of access to goods and services, which shows that this distribution underscores the need for addressing economic disparities and promoting more equitable systems worldwide. Is poverty reduction even desirable? Poverty reduction will be sustainable when the underlying causes of poverty are addressed, which include creating economic opportunities for people in poverty, increasing access to education, providing healthcare and nutrition, and investing in infrastructure, while ensuring a stable political and social environment, which is important for poverty reduction to be sustainable. Traditionally, the largest chunk of the global population is directly engaged in food production and food processing, and its related occupations like storage, marketing, and transportation. The scope of agriculture and its associated occupations in terms of employment cuts across the notion of agriculture being rural, while the remaining associated occupations, largely urban, have been made irrelevant with the availability and application of new technologies and the internet. Governments that focus on supporting the agriculture sector, which includes all the activities required to produce, process, and market produce, will have focused on immediately alleviating the lives of at least 70% of its population to above their current subsistence level. With an invigorating injection of resources into agriculture and its allied sectors, many issues that currently plague countries such as unemployment, migration to urban locations, food shortages, and even civil war would start to ease. And don't think it impossible until you've given it a good try.